Hi everyone, my name is Anna Tichkova. I'm a senior account manager here at Evolving Web. Welcome. Last session before lunch, so thank you for being here. And then we have Michele Jenkins, who is going to be talking to us about the importance of setting up the governance. Oh my God. Setting up governance. Sorry, I guess I'm already thinking about lunch.
Yeah.
So thank you everyone for being here. And
Great.
Michele.
Thank you. Great. Hi, I'm just going to do a quick introduction. I'm Michele Jenkins. I do live here like a block away, which is so nice when I speak at Evolving Web Things because I can roll up like 4 minutes before things start. But we're based here in Montreal. We've got offices up by Jean Talon Market. We focus on everything related to taxonomy at the core. We're mostly graduates of the McGill Library and Information Science program. We've got folks elsewhere in the US on the west coast of Canada as well. But taxonomy is kind of our jam. And from that, we do things related to search, metadata, digital asset management. We're getting more and more into supporting ontology as everybody's moving into AI and knowledge graphs and things like that. So that's kind of our area. We really like to focus on nonprofits and NGOs. So we do a lot of work with and the United Nations, professional associations, universities. In the past, we've worked with the US government, not so much anymore, but we also work with big Fortune 500 companies, EA, Coca-Cola, and Pepsi, oddly enough, Tyson, Costco. If you've bought something online, you've probably interacted with something we've touched on. Myself, my background was actually in programming. I'm a veteran of the 1990s .com world of San Francisco when nobody slept and everybody partied and we would take naps in the server room but never ever go home. I found that writing code and having to wake up in the middle of the night to deal with things was not my jam, and that when you do strategy, they let you sleep in, and you can sometimes have a little bit more space in your work-life balance. So I moved into information architecture, got my master's degree, and now I have over 20 years experience doing things related to metadata and content structuring. I was briefly a Drupal developer, so I've got that in my pocket as well. I love doing integrations, APIs, and playing around with natural language processing pipelines and things like that when I can. So I get to wear a lot of different hats, which is really nice. But today I'm going to speak mostly about the more strategic side of governance. I keep playing around with this slide because I keep hearing about new different systems in play, and everybody wants their systems to talk to each other. So when we come in and talk to an organization, one of the first things we have to do often is help them audit their current ecosystem of technology, because sometimes people aren't even aware of what systems are in play. You get a lot of shadow IT happening where people have solved their own problems. I have an association right now, it's a professional association, and they've had people create an entire new WordPress site for 2 pages for a campaign. And then it just sits there and rots basically, and then somebody else creates a new site because they don't know how to update it or they don't like how they did it. And right now they have 28 different WordPress installs, not using a multi-site setup, literally different ones. They also have Drupal, and now they're doing a digital transformation and rolling out about 20 other systems. Somebody's saying AI will do everything. Somebody's saying enterprise search will fix everything. This is very common. Almost every single organization I work with right now is facing a digital transformation crisis where they have all of these systems in place, and everyone has come up with their own approach to organizing or not come up to their own approach with organizing. So we often see things like, oh, we have categories. And we're like, well, what's in a category? And it turns out a category is a content type, but it's also whether something's featured or not, and its goal and audience, and maybe its subject, but also location. And then when they need that to talk to another system, they start shoving everything into a big giant bag together. And if you put AI on top of this, you can do really terrible things very fast and efficiently. So you can end up with just a complete mismatch if you're trying to filter on things or sort things or just communicate to different technologies what your content is about. This is one organization with 19 different kinds of search for, and these are external users trying to find content. Depending on what part of the site you're on, you're actually on a different system that has an entirely different search system, that has an entirely different way of filtering things. We see a lot of pain points. This was a diagram I did for a very large content-driven commercial company, and all those little stick figures are where they were still downloading things into CSV files and then emailing it to someone to upload to another system. Because they couldn't automate, because they were afraid to try and merge things together, and they didn't know what downstream impacts there were to making changes to metadata and taxonomy upstream. So everybody's trying to get an enterprise view on things. Everybody's all about data-driven decision making and their data lakes and their data warehouses and their data canoes, and they want better content and they want automation. They want control and findability, interoperability, and really to understand what they've got. Oftentimes, no one knows what content they have. They don't know how it's performing, either internally or externally, and they just can't get a handle on data across the board as well. So coming at that with the idea of creating a common semantic layer. Semantics includes taxonomy, metadata, ontology, and then your data and content. We come at it from the taxonomy first perspective, but it's like pulling a little thread on your semantic sweater and you start having to answer questions about all of those things. So while I'm talking about taxonomy governance, we'll see it's kind of the same recipe whether you're working at the taxonomy level or that broader semantic level. So one of the things we talk about when we come into an organization is layers of scope, because you will have taxonomies that are specific to a system. If you're working in SharePoint, you're working in a digital asset management tool, you're working in Salesforce, there's going to be some of those pull-down menus that are hard-coded or only matter when you're looking at your media asset management system. So things like video resolution or length, you don't need to necessarily manage that at an enterprise level. If you have information shared between, say, your digital asset and your media asset and your content management systems, you have that little shared bubble. But maybe that doesn't need to be in a financial system or an HR system. Then you have the outer layer of the onion that is your enterprise taxonomy. That tends to be fairly thin. You might only have a few facets, we call them, that actually matter across the organization. Visibility, security, status, content type, subject, those tend to be location and language also. You wouldn't believe how many different lists of countries one organization might have, or the number of organizations that have made up their own abbreviations for language. So they have ES and SP and SPA and who knows what. So identifying what has to be managed at a system level, at a shared level, and then at that actual enterprise level is really important. We look at these pillars of semantic capability, whether again it's taxonomy, metadata, or ontology, that you have your structures, you have your support for your use cases, that you have a good model that you're working from. You have the technology to store it, hopefully a source of truth that's able to manage changes over time, because all of these things are not static. We used to deal with taxonomies that were literally printed in books and shrink wrapped and sent out every 18 months or something. Now you might have hundreds of changes in a month, and it just needs to go out to all of those systems in a dynamic way that hopefully doesn't involve little stick figures downloading and emailing things to each other. You have your actual implementation. How are people interacting with this taxonomy? Are you asking people to do the tagging? Is there AI suggesting tags, or is it all entirely black boxed behind the scenes, and hopefully you have a person keeping an eye on it or making checks to it? Does it need to map to other systems, either in your organization or in the broader outside world if you're dealing with ISO codes or regulations? Video games have rating agencies. That's a whole world of constantly changing, very critical information that needs to be up to date and needs to relate to how marketing materials are being sent out to a 12-year-old in Germany, because you do not want to put the wrong game recommendation in front of that user. And underpinning all of this is governance. Governance makes sure all these things keep up to date, credible, and useful to the organization over time. Again, none of these things need to be printed out, set in stone, and then completely forgotten. They need to be actively engaged with how the organization works, how the users evolve, and your user research tells you more things, how you might change your organizational goals and focus, and then how that content evolves over time as well. So going into governance. Just to be all on the same page, when we talk about governance, we're really talking about how things work to manage changes. In this case, taxonomy changes, where are they coming from? How does a request for a change happen? We got really excited a couple of years ago because some countries have changed their names lately. And you can imagine the panic in certain organizations who have never thought of where do those country lists live? Who owns them? How do we actually change Swaziland to Eswatini? We had a great example during the Mpox outbreak when the CDC was on high alert, and they had a whole team working specifically on Mpox, and at the time it had been called monkeypox. WHO in the morning, like 4 a.m. our time, decided to officially change that to Mpox, and then each of the health organizations around the world had to wait for authorization at the government level for that to happen, and then the change needed to happen everywhere. So you had a lovely example of us going into the taxonomy management tool, making an old label a synonym so that people could still search for it, updating the new label, and then having every single pull-down menu or filter on the CDC websites have the appropriate label show up. So changes happen in the world, whether it's a new subject or Turkey deciding they want the umlaut over the U, and everyone has to decide where do these changes come from and what do we do with them? Who actually responds to them? Where do these requests go? Who needs to be consulted? If you get an ask from one department and it's an enterprise taxonomy, you can't unilaterally make that change without understanding the impacts to other parts of the organization. When that change is made, how do you let people know there's a new content type, or there's a new label that they should be looking for, or that something has been archived and you prefer a new term now? And then how is that implemented across systems? Ideally, it just happens. We still have a lot of manual work, or people having to either push a button or cut and paste or download something for that. And then how is the health and success of the taxonomy measured? So keeping an eye on, are there any taxonomy terms that have never been used? Are there taxonomy terms being overused? Do you see co-occurrence patterns that might suggest something about how you organize your content or your taxonomy? So first off, roles and responsibilities. We like to define these hats, and sometimes in a small organization, one person might wear many hats, and in very large organizations, each of these could in fact be an entire team of people with that responsibility. At the top, we have the strategic authority. So they're not, necessarily worried about synonyms and spelling and capitalization or mapping things in systems, but they might say something like, we always want to use very thoughtful, inclusive language for population groups. We want to make sure that our organization is always using the most up-to-date term, that we're doing a lot of research on how these things resonate for people, and that is something that we're going to set as an organizational standard. They might say things like the taxonomy should be very high-tech and very granular and very authoritative, because we actually want other people to start using our taxonomy as an authority in the world. So you might have nonprofit organizations like the National Kidney Foundation is one we worked with, and they actually put together some language around dietary restrictions, and they wanted that taxonomy to be something that other people would adapt and use. The next layer under that is implementing accountability. So this is the life cycle of the taxonomy. This is the big decisions, the documentation, the communication, the change management. And then at the bottom, you have your specialist input. So these are people that don't need to go to every taxonomy meeting, but you need to know, who do I have to ask if we're going to change the paint color for the snowmobiles? Is it this marketing team? Does engineering need to know? Is there a translation step? Things like that. And each of these come with a different level of skills. So a lot of times we need to mentor an organization. We do a lot of job shadowing where we'll be the taxonomist for 3 months or 6 months or 2 years, and they'll have people internally working alongside us, and hopefully we kind of start doing that Homer Simpson into the shrubbery thing and leave them to continue on managing their taxonomy on their own. Here's where we kind of talk about that digital governance, or that broader one. I had to fiddle with those triangles. They're still not quite right, and it's going to bug me, but they're close enough. We see a lot of people talking about digital governance and data governance right now, and I have to say that sometimes we bring it up because people will say, well, we have this whole problem where we don't know who owns the content or the systems, and we're down here in this like little tiny taxonomy project being like, you need digital governance, and I actually had a client say, that's a really good term. I like that idea. And we're like, yes, you should go read some books on digital governance. But ideally, we come in when there is a digital transformation effort going on, and there is that broader sense that content means ownership, that there's life cycles, that there's a good way to do these things, and that we hop on those coattails, and that we're not the first time an organization is thinking holistically. But it literally happens that we're introducing people in the company that have never spoken because organizations are so siloed where they've just like never met. Oh, you have a WordPress site too? Oh, so do we. How do you guys run yours? What kind of like fonts do you use? What assets do you use? And they might as well be separate companies. So when possible, build the taxonomy governance into that broader digital governance, or use it as an excuse to get those conversations started. I also have to say that a lot of money is going into data governance at the moment. And so if you can attach taxonomy and metadata to that data, that's where the money is, more than in content in some cases right now. I don't see as much innovation around content. There's a lot of thought that AI is going to take over it, or we have too much content already, but data's golden. Don't actually want you to understand this, but just see that there's a lot of steps in a taxonomy workflow, and the more formalized they can be, the better, so that you don't have the guy who runs the Drupal server deciding what the topics are, which happens quite often. I was a Drupal guy, it's fine, but coming up with things on an ad hoc basis, like, I need a word, we're gonna put cat in there, now we're gonna put feline, now we're gonna put kitty, and then suddenly you have like 14 different kinds of cat in your filter, versus having some processes that say, this is where requests come in, this is how we keep track of what requests have happened, this is how we know who to ask, and this is how we track how we responded to those requests. Documentation is also an important part of your governance. Just having a document gives it weight. And often you can stop an argument from someone who wants a frivolous request because you say, hey, have you read the governance framework? And they go away because they're not going to sit down and read the governance framework. Or we have a style guide so that if you have 5 different people working on the taxonomy in the course of its life, you don't get 14 different kinds of capitalization and spelling and apostrophes and parentheses and slashes and hashtags sneaking in there. In some cases, we create 2 different governance documents, trying to match organizational culture. We have our redacted formal government standard operating procedure. Sometimes these are 25, 30 pages. If you're working for the UN, they want something that like thumps when you put it on the table. And then we have another organization that is all about friendly, accessible readability. And I had a great time doing this one. Are these recorded?
I believe so.
Okay, just checking. And this was really fun because I got to write writing for the web, like scannable, simple, like what are we doing and how are we doing it in like 7 slides. So we always need to find out what is the organizational vibe and try and match that with the governance that we put in place. Again, you don't need to learn this, but this is the kind of checklist we like to provide. You don't just throw a new term in. There's steps to deciding whether this belongs in the scope of the facet. Does it have the right term form? Does it need a synonym? Make sure it's not a synonym somewhere else in the taxonomy. Just having these very careful, clear procedures in place means you will have something that is semantically useful for people and for machines, because sometimes people can look at things and they get the gist of it, and machines are extremely literal and will not get the gist of it. Tools and resources, I consider this part of the governance because it is a big question. Where does the taxonomy live? Where is the source of truth? You don't want competing taxonomy management places because people will just fork it. They will just start adding things to their Drupal and their WordPress and their SharePoint and their Salesforce, and then suddenly all of your API is failing to combine your information, or suddenly you're seeing duplicates all over the place. So defining where the taxonomy lives, how does it get into the other systems, how are you sharing it with people? Because you might be using the taxonomy to tag, but can it be available as a reference? Is it part of a data dictionary or a business glossary so that someone who's new to the organization can go look at the 40 million acronyms that your organization has, or your particular definition of something like project or partner? Sometimes those have special meanings in an organization. How do you communicate taxonomy updates? Do you have a Slack channel? Do you have a newsletter? Do you have an intranet page? So that if someone wants to see what's happening, they know. But it also just gives people a sense that it's being actively managed. So even if they're not really caring that there's a new subject, that sense that there is a mechanism behind the taxonomy and that there is change and growth in the taxonomy inspires a little confidence and ownership of it. Hey, we have a taxonomy. There's someone listening. I don't need to go make my own special list. And then how do they make a request and track the status of their change? If they're making a request and it just disappears in an oubliette, again, you get people doing their own thing there. Some of the approaches to taxonomy governance are deciding whether your taxonomy is going to be where all of your terms come from and get fed into different systems, so things are aligned from the beginning, or whether you're going to use it as a translation layer. So if you have several different systems that all have their own way of talking, sometimes you need this. Sometimes what the engineering people call Viper Red needs to be, the hex color, or they have a special internal name, and then when it's on the website, it's going to have a different name than when it's in marketing. And we see that a lot if you have a complicated, e-commerce pipeline or something. They don't want to use the same term, and it doesn't make sense for them to use the same term, but the taxonomy knows those are the same terms. So you're reporting about how much paint you're buying versus how many Ski-Doos and Viper Red are being sold. That connection can happen. We like to suggest a pro-growing strategy of starting small with a couple of systems, often the CMS, especially if you have Drupal. It works really well in there because it has great taxonomy management kind of out of the box. And to start plugging additional systems in. So kind of growing from that local taxonomy to a shared taxonomy to an enterprise taxonomy. And it lets organizations cut their teeth on the governance. So we'll have a robust governance where we get everybody in the room to talk about the enterprise, and then what we build is something very small. It's like, here's your literally maybe 50 terms and a couple of facets. Practice making changes, practice having alignment, build out your documentation, practice having requests, get that taxonomy management tool in place if you're going down that path. And then you demonstrate the benefits. So something as simple as all deciding what the status is for a document, so you don't have final dash no really final, this one for Jeff final, and instead you have an idea that this is reviewed, this is validated, different kinds of content have different workflows, and everyone can find a final document. That is a huge win in an organization. And then you ask for a little bit more in terms of pushing that envelope of, now we're going to ask for more of your time to develop more of a formal, broader taxonomy, integrate more systems, bring more things into alignment, and then iteratively enrich and extend until you have something close to a holistic coverage of it. How are we doing on time? I think I'm pretty close to be done.
Yeah, great.
Okay, great. So main risks is just lack of shared ownership. IT is like, great, we got it, we have the taxonomy, and then that pretty much to me means that it's not going to go anywhere. Ideally, there's a kind of KM or information management, or even under marketing, something more on the content side, but having that overlap of the technical infrastructure and the squishy content and meaning part is really important. It does take resourcing, so a large organization might have a real taxonomist on staff. The New York Times has 7, which is cool, but some places it might be someone's 1/4 of their time or 1/10 of their time, but there needs to be someone who has that hat. And then the iteration and feedback loops is you just have to be prepared for people to ask for changes, and you have to be able to show them that those changes happen so that they feel like it's something that they have input to. We see this all the time, that we need to talk to stakeholders who understand the technical implications of semantic decisions, the people who understand the content that the organization is trying to tag with this, and that understand what the business is trying to do. And the overlap with people who have time for any of this is 0, because that's a really special person in an organization. So often the taxonomist or the taxonomy team needs to figure out how to get these separate inputs and then combine them and figure out how to work with people. I think main thing, if no, let's skip all those. Ask a taxonomist if you need help. We're very niche, but we exist, and we're great either for coming in and helping you assess current state and do a roadmap, or kind of holding your hand through the initial process all the way through implementation as well. And I think we have like a minute or 2 for questions. Okay, great. I know I was pushing it there. Anyway, thank you. And now everybody's eager for lunch, but if there's any questions, otherwise I'm around at lunch too.
Kind of just a quick comment, like I've had a lot of, I appreciated your talk. I had a lot of issues with a few organizations who use very vague terms for their taxonomies, like category or type.
Yes.
And when you actually dig into it, people don't really understand what that means.
Yes.
They put everything in there.
Yes.
And I found that one solution was to instead of use category, use something like, structure or audience or something that kind of explains what you want those terms to be. So.
Yeah, you should have a framework that defines each facet. So you take a faceted approach that says, in this case, we're describing subject. What does subject mean versus content type versus location? When can a location be a subject? This is all the nerdy information management stuff that we like to lay out. And then when somebody says, hey, we need to add something, you can go and look and say, this doesn't fit in there. This is about the isness and not the aboutness, or this is not a population group, and for every organization, it's going to be very different. There's not a way to just take it off the shelf and do that, especially if you get into demographics and things like that. But yeah, defining your taxonomy facets is super important before you build anything. I could do a whole other session on frameworking, but yeah, it's good that have awareness of that. Yes.
Following on that, what do you do with stakeholders whose desired taxonomies do not get included?
Yeah.
How do you navigate creating something where the information they need a shared language for across either subsections within the enterprise or the enterprise can be recognized?
Yeah.
Or
the other great thing about a framework, well, you might, but the great thing about the framework is you can put it in the framework as a potential future step. So really judoing that energy, and when you do the enterprise vision, you get everybody's everything, you cast a really wide net, you define it, and part of that is them saying what their use cases are and explaining why they need it, and then having everyone prioritize all the facets. For the future. Yeah, and say, look, we've got it, we've captured that, but until it bubbles up in terms of priority, it's just going to be documented there. And there might be things, if it's something they're managing separately, they can start to align with the style guide, and they can start using the taxonomy governance processes. So if that moves into the enterprise world, they'll be more ready for it. So I say, document it, say, oh, we totally got that down, we put a pin in that, and then give them homework and say, great, while you're waiting, you can start moving towards doing a better job with your taxonomy so that it's nice and cleaned up for that later. But you definitely want to make sure that they feel like they're part of it, even if they're not part of that first round or even the first 3 or 4 rounds. All right, I'll let everybody go to lunch, but I'm around, so find me if you want to talk about taxonomy. Thanks.